People who've gotten their bosses fired. How? The CEO publicly praised me for completing a task that my boss had struggled with. So my boss retaliated by forwarding all of his tasks to me in an effort to overwhelm me with work. I actually found his job pretty manageable, which the CEO also noticed and fired him, giving me his job in office. It was my supervisor. It got to the point that I had decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. Supervisor would talk about all the people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. My husband and I happened to work at the same place, different departments, and my supervisor would make sexual comments about threesomes with him. What hotel we picked for our afternoon delight. It like that. It was so bloody uncomfortable. Apart from this, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. Problem with supervisor was one of the guys and I was the only girl. Turns out his boss was disgusted. Told his boss, who lost his mind. They started an investigation which took 3 days. They interviewed staff. They corroborated what I said. They checked the security cameras. Saw he was spending most of his workday outside smoking. And was fired. When he was told, he guessed. Wasn't hard. That I was the person who complained and tried to get to me to apologize that I took it the wrong way. The best feeling was my co-workers surrounding me as he was wailed out. That was a lovely ending to it all. I took a cell phone video of her taking money from the safe and putting it in her wallet. I knew she was doing it, and I also knew that the moment it came out that money was missing, she'd blame it on me. She was so stupid that she didn't realize she should stop doing that while I was standing 10 feet away with my phone out and facing her. I was fired because I abandoned my job while on short-term disability. Because while on approved leave, they are a date for me to return. Never informed me, by their own admission. And when I obviously didn't return to work, I was fired. The locker I had at work had my work boots in it that the company pays $90 a year towards. However, there isn't a pair under $100 available, so you always end up having some come out of your paycheck. At that point they are yours regardless of the company line. They disagreed and said they were thrown out. I reported them stolen, and the HR director responsible for getting me fired was fired. My boss hired me at a surprisingly good salary, and got me 2 raises in the first 5 years. When the work slowed down to our department, he defended all his employees to management. They fired him the same day they fired me. Was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is if the Zamboni doors open, you get the duck off the ice. Somebody had decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway, and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss, because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "I feel okay." Then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it then, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration, because I felt there should be some sort of documentation paper trail in case God forbid I ended up having a brain hemorrhage or something a few days later. The boss was fired by my next shift. He grabbed the back of my neck and said, "If you ever say I'm wrong in front of a customer again, I will beat your ass." I went to the GM and told him, and my supervisor was relieved of his duties about 5 minutes later. Phoned him to tell him I won't be at work for the rest of the week as my mum is terminally ill in hospital. The next day, about an hour after she passed away, he phoned and asked why I wasn't at work. I just hung up on him so I wouldn't say anything that would get me in trouble. The next day I sent the area manager a WhatsApp message explaining what he'd be done and attached a video of him breaking the freezer door while having a tantrum, which cost the store nearly $5,000 in lost stock and the repair costs, which he'd told the AM it broke on its own. He got fired that day and I got 2 weeks off with full pay. Basically said I'm quitting because of X. Boss looked at me and said, "Can I convince you to delay this by a week?" Worked from home for a week. Then she, X, was gone. Worked there for 5 more years. Then 7 at the company that acquired us. I took a phone call on my cell when at my desk. Middle manager came up and screamed at me. yelling about how I was not allowed to take calls for clients while at that office. I was a contractor and made it perfectly clear that I did work for multiple clients prior to doing work for this company. The CTO's office was 10 feet from mine. He came out and stood in his doorway listening to the rant. When the middle manager was done, I just looked over at the CTO and said, "It's him or me, and at the moment I don't give a duck which you pick." CTO walked the middle manager out right then. Funny thing, I didn't hang up throughout the incident, and it was my wife on the other end. I was spending about 70 hours a week at their site digging their staff out of a hole they had dug themselves in. My manager wanted to prove I'm slacking off so he could write me up. So he watched CCTV footages, then wrote, printed out and signed a detailed 17 pages worth of Word document. What did I do in the past 2 days? With timestamps, like 7:59 arriving, 8:01 speaking with co-worker A and B, 8:07 sitting down to my desk, etc. He told me that he's not happy with my work ethics if I won't improve my efficiency. I'm for it. I took the papers and showed to his boss and told her that I'm not happy with my manager's work ethics and his efficiency might be better if he wouldn't watch 17 hours of CCTV footages to spy on an employee. She was terrified. It would have been a rock solid lawsuit for me, but I love my job, and we had to search for a new manager. Also, my salary raised. Not my boss, but I helped my friend get her boss fired. He was a general manager, and always grabbing her sides, purposely scheduling her to have shifts alone with him, asking her for nudes, asking her to sleep with him, etc. She reported it so many times to the owner, big boss, and they said they couldn't do anything because they hadn't seen it and had no their reports other than her account. So I called and complained as a customer about how I witnessed him being creepy to her and how it made me uncomfortable. For the most part true lol. I just don't shop there. Waited until my exit interview, then told our professional standards department that she had been bullying me the whole time I was there. I left my last company due to a bully of a GM. Many people were leaving over him, causing problems, being sexist, racist, doing things people could easily sue them for, claiming sexual harassment. List goes on. Everyone informed HR during their exit interviews. Hell, he even tried to make my exit interview not happen, though they still weren't doing anything. I had been at my new job for a couple months now and was still getting complaints from my old team almost daily. So I made an email account and named concerned company name crew. Sent an email to everyone who had an email account within the company explaining what he still did with events spanning from his start to the day prior. They fired him within the week and my old crew thanked me. One summer I volunteered to help a conservation society in East Africa. The aim of the project was to educate the local rural population about poaching and to get them to help us stop it from the ground up. Anyway, I was staying with the lead ranger and his family, and on numerous occasions he served us meat that I'm 100% sure was poached. He tried to tell me that it was pork, but it was dark and gamey with lots of small bones. I think that it was small antelope like dik or dika. When I returned to Nairobi, I mentioned to my grandpa, his boss's boss, that we'd eaten some odd meals. He investigated and found out that my boss had a poacher friend who was selling him illegal meat. He was fired. I didn't feel guilty. Poaching is awful. Not fired but demoted. I got fired and explained in my exit interview how the reason I wasn't making progress on my project is that I had no idea what I was doing. I was never trained. My WFH boss in another location took off for 4 hours a day to run errands and go to the gym, etc. They checked my story out and ended up demoting my boss, taking her off the project, and taking away all her direct reports. I kept a detailed log of both of our times in and out of the office, as well as a detailed list of my work efforts. When I was called into HR to be fired, I produced the logs. I was given their position at the request of a former manager after HR fired my boss, sire. Not my direct boss, but the new VP of our department. Everyone hated him and the poorly thought through changes he was threatening to implement. A lot of my co-workers were talking about looking for other jobs. Our manager at the time, my direct boss, was really inexperienced and had no idea how to handle the situation. I was only a year out of college and didn't know what to do. But I was openly gay, as was the VP of a different department. We were the only two openly gay people at the company at the time, so we chatted a bit. I went to his office and said, "I don't know if you have any influence on my department, but we're going to lose half our team if someone doesn't do something about this guy," and I didn't know who else to come to. He asked me to have anyone else in the department who felt the same way come talk to him. I spread the word, and there were plenty of takers. A few days later, we all saw my department's VP have a private meeting with the CEO. After that meeting, he announced that he wasn't going to make the changes he'd been talking about. He then proceeded to do absolutely nothing for the next month because it turned out that if he couldn't lead the department in a top-down authoritarian style, he genuinely didn't know what else to do. He was fired at the end of that month. Apparently, the gay agenda is improving working conditions for everyone. You're welcome. He was such a bulleter. All talk. He yells at me one day for failing to do some task, which got done anyway because someone got a hold of my boss. They only needed a mailing address I forgot to give them. Meanwhile, he's over at his buddy's house looking at his new boat. Pissed me off, so I called his boss and told him all the work that gets done out of this office is me. 'Twas a long talk with him, but Big Boss said he had a feeling that was what was going on. This obviously wasn't the first time my boss was slacking off, but him giving me it when he wasn't even in the office was the camelback straw. Boss didn't get fired, but left shortly after. Was an awkward couple of weeks. Big Boss ended up writing me a nice recommendation letter when I changed positions. Not me, but my GF at the time. We were both working at a small burrito chain. She was front of house manager and I was kitchen manager. Above us was one senior manager and then the owner. We did tip pooling based on hours, and the senior manager always told my GF not to count the tips every night, as he divided it up at the end of the week. Well, of course she counted them every night. Turns out the senior manager was stealing almost $500 a week from employees and tips. And because his previous farm manager never questioned him, it had likely been going on for years. She told the owners and he was gone the next day. A week later his wife left him. Our desks were separated by a 5-foot cubicle wall. He was under the mistaken impression that it totally blocked sound. Thus I got to hear all his loud phone conversations. Primarily his booty calls, including those with his boss's fiancée. I figured it was none of my business and tried to ignore it. Well, there was a position in another department that I was interested in, and as per procedure I handed in an application to my talkative boss. Didn't hear anything further and followed up a couple of days later, only to be told that something must have happened to the application. Filled out another one and handed it in. As I returned to my desk, I hear the boss on the phone with a friend laughing about how he had just trashed my application again and how he was never going to let go of me. I go to boss's boss and angrily offer my resignation, telling him what I had just overheard, explaining that I was constantly hearing his phone calls like his booty calls, like with less than women's nama more than on less than women's nama more than on less than boss's fiance's nama more than. He got very quiet and told me to go back to my desk and he'll take care of everything. The next day I come in and boss is gone. The day after, I have an interview with the other department. Got the position. I tend to avoid office drama, but really, he should have stuck to screwing his boss's fiancée and not tried to screw me as well. In college I worked in a takeout restaurant just off campus, and we were all employed by the school. I was 17-18 years old, back in 2007-2008, and my boss, the manager, was a 40-something creeper, hitting on me, touching me inappropriately, trying to massage my shoulders, tickling me, putting his hands on around my waist, despite me asking him to stop. Then he friended me on Facebook. I declined, and suddenly my work schedule was changed. I was on shift during hours when I had class, and when I explained that problem, I got taken off the schedule altogether. I told the assistant manager what was going on, which I was explicitly told by the manager not to talk to the assistant, and he reported what was going on to upper management. Boom. Manager was fired. I worried for a while if he was going to come after me for that. His boss asked me to keep tabs on him. He was working a fraction of his hours, salaried, calling an hourly guy so he could leave early, not doing work while he was there, etc. I didn't technically get her fired, but when she refused to hire me full time after 3 months on temporary like promised, I just said it wasn't worth it. quit, and a week later about 30 people followed because they were getting similarly screwed. So they got rid of all of the management and transferred in new managers. Not me, but someone I know was sexually harassed by the boss. After trying everything legal to get rid of him, she slept with him and told him to stop mid-coit. He did not stop. He got fired. She filmed for proof. I worked in a call center once with a female supervisor. She was a particularly itty person. Long story short, she hated me because I would refuse to date her. She asked multiple times, and multiple times I explained very nicely that I was not interested but were to remain friends. After about the third time, she started giving me negative marks for reviews, phone calls and the such. One day she pulled me into the office with another manager and proceeded to write me up for talking on my personal phone during work hours. Mind you, I had not done this. I looked at her and refused to do this, walked out of her office and into the department manager's office. This was my first complaint after about 3 years with this company. I explained the situation and advised what has been transpiring for months now. Apparently someone else had seen this about a month ago and had already went to management about what she was doing to me. Within 10 minutes she was pulled into the office and demoted back down to my position, but in another department. The thing that sucked is that this department sat directly across from me. I've told this story a few times before, so I'll keep it short. I didn't get my boss fired, but she blames me. Boss and I didn't get along, but she didn't have the authority to fire me. But she promised her boyfriend my job, so she hires her boyfriend in another position, with the plan they'll drive me to quit, and then she can just promote him to my job. This lasted for about a month. She fired him when they broke up. He confessed their scheme to me on his way out. We'd actually become friends at this point, and I tell him he should really tell HR. HR does their investigation. She's fired because sleep with me and I'll give you a job as textbook sexual harassment. And she tells anyone who'll listen that it's all my fault because I didn't quit like I was supposed to. He'd show up every day and tell us a tale of his sexual exploits. Whether true or not, none of us wanted to hear it. If an attractive looking female comes in, he drops what he's doing and stares at her, drooling like a dog in a dog treat factory. After she leaves, he had to say a comment about her appearance. After talking on the phone with a certain manager, he always comments on how nice her ass is. He'd bully us employees and other managers, called us itches a lot despite us getting onto him for it. My female co-worker reported him. We all had a phone meeting with our district manager and HR. He was suspended until the investigation was over and they ruled to terminate him. Surprisingly, HR worked for us that day. My first grade teacher slapped me across the face for not memorizing hot cross buns. The slap hurt for sure, but having it done in front of a full class hurt more. I told the principal. We had a sub the rest of the year. He's not fired yet, but I complained to HR about my boss twice in the past year. A week after the second complaint, I was the one on a performance plan. I literally changed nothing about my work, passed the plan, and then quit a few weeks later. It's been 3 months and I hear from the org's lawyer, who is a friend, that the HR rep is on her way out and top brass is having some second thoughts about my boss as he's moved on to harassing another coworker. I outworked both of them. Learn your boss's job. Master your job. Prove you can easily handle your boss's job. It was the night shift and for years this ducking guy had been either locking himself in the office and playing video games all night, or going home and ducking sleeping on the clock, and no, I'm not making that up. Finally one night the regional manager showed up for a surprise visit at like 3 AM. It was a group effort. The night crew took great pleasure in telling the RM exactly where his night manager was. He was stealing $5K in parts for his personal cars. He also was turning customers into cash jobs for a discount and then pocketing about half the money. I went to HR, asked the proper way to report theft. I followed what HR has said and then we were both fired. Best thing that ever happened to me, TBH. My direct supervisor, Linda, was a cantankerous older woman with poor education and even worse people skills. About 3 months after I started, I got her so pissed off, just by doing my job, that she cursed me out, got up from her desk and quit. I don't even remember what I said that set her off. I probably asked her if she was done with her half of something that I needed in order to finish my half, and became exasperated when she wasn't. because she'd been farting around all morning. It was a common occurrence. After Linda walked out, our boss refused to hire her back when she begged, even though she'd been there something like 15 years. Because her attitude was so terrible and she'd become such a toxic, pathetic excuse for a human being. I got a pretty solid raise. Most of Linda's tasks, our boss was not unkind and took over some things herself, while giving me more practical things that I enjoyed doing. And even though my car was fine, she'd always have me drive her car to go make coffee runs, deposit checks, run errands, etc. It was a Toyota Solara convertible, and she'd tell me to take the top down and have fun. I liked that job. I learned quite a bit, and if I hadn't found something closer to home, for even more money, I probably would have been there quite a while. My complete misogynist if a boss walked by my desk one day and goes, "Sweetie, I would never put you in front of customers with your blonde hair and your size 0 jeans," right in front of our president of sales, who happened to also be a woman. He was gone within a few hours, although I had already filed several grievances with HR. It was delightful. After our favorite supervisor finally retired, we got a new guy in for 6 months to take over our department. One morning I was on break eating a sandwich I had bought from the deli. An assistant manager came up and was talking, and I had mentioned I was eating more from the deli and that my manager had recommended some of the better sandwiches. As it turned out, this what seemed like a very casual conversation turned into a loss prevention investigation, resulting in management discovering my manager was stealing his lunches from the deli. A couple years later, when I moved up to full-time to pay off school debt, another FT manager basically revealed I had gotten the ball rolling. Paranoid, sociopath boss wiretapped all internal phone calls and made life miserable for all who worked in that department. After moving over 1,200 miles to the job location, called wife frequently to discuss the job and family progress in moving there. During those calls, I spun a story about how all of his top managers were plotting against him, which enraged him and he took out his anger on them. Eventually they went to the company owner and complained, and he was fired the next day. HVAC tech brought a new person on as a scheduler. This person got a power trip almost instantly. I outperformed everyone in the company and this pune kept harping me about something. Like every time I called the office he'd say something itty. Last call of the day comes to me and I'm pissed. I've worked 10 hours. No breaks. Just go. 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 So he starts in again while giving me a job that should have gone to someone else. I get pissed after getting the info and hang up on him. He starts texting me. I call his boss, one of my good friends, and lay it out. Him or me. Something has to change. Either I never have to talk to him, which is possible, or I'll bring in my truck. I get a text from the prick to be at shop early. I get there early so I can watch him clean out his desk. Found out later he had been fired from the last 4 jobs for basically the same thing. HVAC technicians can be your best friends if you treat them right, but we don't take it for nothing. This wasn't me, but I worked in a kitchen that was ran very poorly. The owners owned 20 or so restaurants in the region, and after a solid year of awful management and little profit, they finally decided to audit the damn place. All of the assistant managers had private sit down with the owners and most had little to say, just that we were often busy and hard to succeed with such high turnover. Then it was Kimmy Veach's turn. She was an assistant who had worked at the restaurant for longer than anybody else. She went way back with the owners. She completely sold out our GM and all his wrongdoings. Our GM was promptly fired. Then Kimmy was called back into a private meeting with the owners and was also fired since she knew all of these things were happening and failed to notify the owners. What a day that was. I've been reading this thread for an hour. The tea is piping. Suggesting guests to make complaints because of how bad the store was ran. Even told my own personal experiences to make the customers feel sorry for me. Soon enough, corporate showed up and the store director couldn't handle being yelled at and quit. 2 other managers have been relocated and an our team member quit after receiving so many complaints. I really disliked them, but I'm worried if their replacements are worse. We'll have to see. Stay tuned. Our general manager just quit yesterday before getting fired. We had a bowling party Sunday and he came drunk as could be. I feel bad because he is going through a divorce, but he hit on so many of the girl employees there. One was 19 and he offered to buy her a car if she went home with him.